This podcast deals with themes, languages, and situations that may not be suitable for young audiences. If you're under the age of 18, parental guidance isn't going to help you here. And welcome to Now Open the Podcast, the sex education podcast that's more sex than education. I'm Trisha.
My name is Jobim.
And I am Kai.
Hey guys, nice to be back. Nice to be back. What'd you guys do over the week? I missed you guys.
I missed you so much.
Yeah, we always miss having our token straight male on the show. I don't know. My weekend was.
I feel heard as a straight male.
This is the only platform where you can share your opinions.
Safely.
Yeah. Well, my weekend was
Trisha, how was your week?
It was spent just chilling really at home, working and spending time with my lovely girlfriend. What did you do, Kai?
Oh, wow. I had a nerdy weekend. So I've been working on my research paper for my master's. But it's a cool, I honestly love my topic because it's about lesbian actresses and how their journey towards parang they seem as though they have similar backgrounds, but when you look into it, there's a lot of like variety in how they were brought up and how that plays into their work as actors. So that's what I'm working on right now. I mean, it's overdue by like 2 months, but I'm working on it.
Still proud of you though. There's a pandemic. You're doing your best.
In-depth study on the background of lesbian actors. It's fascinating.
What about you, Jobim? Why did you leave us? What did you do?
I started a new job, and so to celebrate this week, I bought myself a Spider-Man suit. Hasn't arrived yet, but it will.
Like a full one?
Yeah, like a full one with a mask and everything. I'm going to look super good in it. Never going to walk. I mean, it's never going to see the light of day. I'm only going to wear it inside my room, like watching TV and stuff, right?
Can you wear it on the show?
No. It will be for recreation and role play only. That's the only thing.
All right, y'all. If you want to wear the Spider-Man suit on the show, do a laugh react on the episode.
I'm going to hang my head off the end of the bed, and we're going to try to recreate that Tobey Maguire Spider-Man kiss thing. Because I'm not fit enough to dangle off of anything. So anyway, that's what happened this week.
Oh my
goodness.
Okay,
so from interesting things that happened to us this week to horrible things that happened to other people this week. This week's newsstand, do we call it newsstand? Yeah, this week's newsstand is about none other than our president yet again. We know that this dude, I mean, his main thing, like one of his defining characteristics is that he is shit to women, right? That's like one of the things you think about when Duterte shit to women. It's just up there.
Oh yeah.
That's more or less his platform. Duterte shit to women, But this week he took it a step further, by apparently trying to cop a feel at his kasambahay. So Malacanang again defended Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte over his gesture to touch a woman captured in a video of his 76th birthday celebration, a behavior panned by critics as another show of lewdness and tendency to objectify women. I don't understand why Rappler feels the need to have to qualify like a behavior panned by critics as another show of lewdness and tendency to objectify women, because it is literally a show of lewdness and tendency to objectify women. Like, it's not just critics, it's statement of fact. Yeah. In a video that has now gone viral, Duterte can be seen in his Davao City home where he fled after like the pandemic broke out here, right? He was like, fuck that. Went home, celebrated his birthday with some lechon. Eating a meal in the company of family members and house help. As a woman brings him a small birthday cake, the president attempts to touch the woman roughly in the area of her private parts. And I mean, this is not the video that I was prepared to see. I thought he was going to like make a pass at her butt as she walked past. But this is like a full-on like grope. You know what I mean? This was like a
very
from my hand
very
kind of
Trumpian with the grab him by the pussy statement almost. Like
Yes, almost as if he was paying tribute on his birthday, you know?
It's so like you don't get a free pass to be a dick on your birthday. Well, you're a dick all the time, but like
right.
And like I don't know if you've seen the video.
I've seen the video, yeah.
Yeah, so like, but if the people watching, if you've seen the video, but the way that she dodges the gesture looks like she expected it. You know, like
those were some trained reflexes, man. That was like
she was so fast.
Saw that coming, you know. Yeah. That's not a reaction to something that only happened once. And you saw on her face, there was like she didn't even flinch, you know. She was like, carry on. Just a regular thing that happens in the presidential household.
Yeah. And I really hate how all right, and I really hate how Malacanang tried to defend it, because obviously they have to at this point. They've already dug their own grave. They have to keep going. And Roque said something like, "Oh, it was a joke," and matagal na niyang kasambahay, as if that is any kind of excuse. That actually is worse. It's workplace sexual harassment.
Like the look on her face, the fact that that she was smiling doesn't betray the fact that she was okay with it. You know, she's smiling because the fucking president of the Philippines just tried to grab her by the pussy on his birthday, and she's not about to make a big deal out of it in front of everybody. You know what I mean?
Honestly, every woman is very familiar with that awkward smile laugh that you do when you're avoiding.
Right.
You're like,
right.
You know, like we all do that. Like, because you never know how the other person's gonna react.
I think it's a protective measure. Like that little like giggle that you do when something out of place happens, especially when it comes to harassment. You get kind of like, oh, don't do that. It's like you said, you don't know how they're gonna react. So like the most you can do is just be pleasant and just kind of go with the flow. You know?
It's almost as if, as a defense mechanism, women try to cushion the blow of rejection by laughing because they're afraid of what the guy might do if he feels rejected.
And we all know what Duterte would do if he feels rejected. Like, he's a literal murderer, you know? He has obviously shown that he has no qualms about spilling blood of people that he doesn't like or people who stand up against him. And, like, she was just looking out for herself and her own life. So I do not blame her at all for how she reacted. It absolutely falls on the president. And shame on Malacanang for trying to excuse this fucking misogynist bullshit in 2021. Honestly, how do we forward the conversation about consent and like bodily autonomy and agency if literally the highest, most powerful person in the land is just like doing that on video with complete impunity? It's impossible.
Exactly.
Well, I don't know about you guys, but after that, I'm going to need a little palate cleanser. And this week we are promoting a creator by the name of Sage Ilagan. We're promoting Discord Love. This sounds fairly recent because I'm guessing this was like made during quarantine because Discord Love. I don't know. Sage Ilagan is a composer, music producer, and sound engineer based in the Philippines. Sage describes his music as the moment when a heartbreak makes the end of the world seem not bad. Oh. Wow. Anyway, hope you guys enjoy. Nice. That was not what I was expecting, I'll be honest, but I really, really liked it.
Actually, I really want to say thanks to Red from the Discord who actually shared it. And that's how I caught wind of this song, and I offered to promote it because it's a good song. Like, I was also very pleasantly surprised by it.
Honestly, as a radio DJ, every time I come across a track that's pop punk that's good, I always try to snatch it up for the radio station because there's not a lot floating around these days. There's a lot of people who are trying to bring pop punk back because, let's face it, it's a genre that's almost 20 years old. But the people that are trying to do it are just trying to copy it without an understanding of the genre, and that song was not bad. It sounded pretty good. Anyway, we wanted to say good evening to everybody who's listening and watching live right now. Saying good evening to Ruth, Alice, Trisha, Mitzi, Nikki, Nick, Maki, and Patricia. Good evening to you guys. Please leave comments on like anything that we discussed tonight because we have a very, very interesting topic on hand. In fact, this is a topic that has been on the back burner since we started doing the podcast, when we were talking about what kind of things we wanted the show to be about. This was one of the things we were very, very passionate about. And we are very fortunate to have our guests with us tonight. Kai?
All right. So tonight we have a very interesting and very debated topic. Tonight we're talking about sex work and feminism. And to help us explore this, we have Sharmila Parmanand, who has a PhD in multidisciplinary gender studies and whose doctoral research focuses on sex trafficking discourse, especially as it applies locally. Also, we have Delilah, a full-service sex worker in the Philippines.
Hello. Good evening, and thank you so much for joining us.
Hello. All right. So, let's get right to it. How did you get into sex work as a job and a field or that field of study? So, like, how did you get into this? Like, how did it happen?
I'm gonna go first. Okay, Charm, I'll go first, huh? I got into it, just like anyone that needs to get their bills paid would go get a job. The story is not like, it's not really that interesting. It's just the same as everyone that needed their bills paid and they needed to get a job. But at the time, I was not finished studying. In fact, I'm still not. And I was doing gigs that really didn't pay me enough. So, hold on. So to me, I felt like, it's not enough. What I make is not enough. And I decided, like, maybe I should try this thing. And at first it was very, very awkward because we're, everywhere else really in the world, we're taught that, like, once you do that, you're like stooping down, like you're degrading yourself, you're stripping down to such a very low morality. Like the concept of morality, the concept of morality is that, like, you've stooped yourself down so low. And it was pretty jarring for me because when I did it, like when I actually did it, and like my first time doing it, weirdly enough, I didn't feel degraded. I felt empowered because who the fuck wants to make like 350 pesos for like 8 hours work when I could work as hard, but then I would get paid better, and then it would mean that I would have flexible time and I could like be able to do things that I needed to do instead of like waste like almost an entire day because I have to commute and I have to go to the office. I have to do this and I have to do that for like 350 pesos. But obviously what felt empowering for me was that, like, doing that work, it gave me a sense of financial freedom because the pay was so much better, even though it's not. I mean, if you really ask me, I don't think I get paid enough, but it's so much better than what like regular people who do regular jobs are paid. So yeah, like that was a long story, but the short story is that I got into it because I needed bills to get paid, and I wasn't paid enough doing my regular job, and I was working way too hard for way too little. And I thought to myself, I need to be earning more. And so that's how it was.
Absolutely. How about you, Sharmila?
So I guess my story is a bit different because I am this feminist who was trying to help Delilah, right? This very arrogant feminist who thought I got feminism figured out and wanted to save people and wanted to do good in the world. So I actually began working in anti-trafficking. And, anti-trafficking in the Philippines tends to conflate all sex work and all prostitution with trafficking. This is not the approach they take when it comes to domestic work. This is not the approach they take when it comes to factory work or other precarious forms of work. But somehow when it's sex work, we must rescue them. And, I used to believe this until I started interacting with the sex workers who were rescued, who did not want to be rescued and who were very angry at being rescued and whose lives were worse off because of these interventions. And I started to see a big disjunct between what the official policies are and what sex workers said they preferred. And I was like, wait a minute, I don't want to inadvertently make your lives worse. And so I ended up doing a course correction and saying, wait a minute, no one has listened to the sex workers. That's what I'm going to do instead. That's going to be my intervention. So this is how I ended up actually advocating for, decriminalization.
That's amazing that you mentioned you started in sex trafficking, because I feel like, I don't know about y'all, but personally, that was also the route I took. It was very, women are being exploited. They're only doing this because they're forced to, and nobody wants to be a sex worker. And you're right, talking to sex workers, especially with the rise of Alter in recent years, because I didn't know any sex workers, or at least I didn't know that I knew any. When Alter came out, and obviously during the pandemic, a lot of people turned to sex work, and all of a sudden, so many people in my life are in sex work. And that really, I guess, really changes your perspective, being able to interact with the people that you claim you want to help without listening to them. It's kind of ridiculous.
Right. And what Sharm said about like listening to the people instead of listening to sex workers, instead of trying to impose that this is what we should do to your lives, or this is what we should do for you. Like, I think that's such an important point to make. Now, when you're trying to do something for a person or a group of people, you don't impose what you think you should do for them. You should listen to them. And it's so interesting to see now, when you like you said, like different aspects of different forms of precarious work are treated so differently as compared to sex work. And that just really begs the question, why? And that leads me to asking, like, what is it about sex work? What constitutes sex work that makes it that gives out this idea to the general public now they have to save sex workers, when really that's not what they want.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, as someone that has been doing it, I mean, I did it as a 17-year-old. Like, that's actually when I started doing that. And a lot of people might think, oh my God, that was so sad. But okay, what are you doing about it? What are you doing to teenagers who have to do such a very emotionally and physically taxing and draining job? Because what you're doing essentially is you're just looking at people who are falling on the cracks. You're not literally creating a safety net for them. When I was a teenager doing that kind of really, really, it's I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It is dangerous, but not dangerous in the way that people perceive it to be dangerous. It's dangerous because of the way it is perceived. I mean, when I do the job itself, it's not dangerous, but the how I am treated because of me doing my job, how I am seen, not just by society, but in policies. That's what makes it dangerous. And we all know when something goes underground, it becomes a very good breeding ground for abusers, because they can get away with the things that they're doing. They don't really necessarily have to be held accountable. So there's really no way to hold them accountable. But every single teenager that is doing the work that I did, or is doing the work that I'm still doing, we don't need to be criminalized. What we need is access to resources, because a lot of teenagers do it because a lot of the times their parents fail them, society fails them, the government itself fails them, and it's really hard to tell the teenager and be like, oh, hey, just get a job, because like, what can a teenager who probably has not finished education get a regular job at, and it's expensive to live in this world that's very capitalistic and very exploitative to people who just need to survive. So I feel that like I need to point that out, that while I did start this job as a 17-year-old, and I may never recommend it to any 17-year-old or any minor, because it's basically child labor, and no one should do that. But who am I to judge a child for trying to survive? And who is anyone really? If you're not doing anything, and you're only contributing to them being criminalized, to them being more marginalized, you're not doing anything. What you're doing is you're just contributing to them becoming more marginalized and becoming more oppressed, and then they'll have to do even the worst jobs. There's like worse jobs out there if you think that like sex work is bad. Right, but anyway, so I was going to answer the question about like what constitutes sex work. A lot of the times people misconstrue it, as in like they think that like sex work is just about like you having sex with your client, but it's not. Sex work is basically any form of sexual or erotic labor. If you are a exotic dancer, you're already doing sex work. If you are someone who sells pictures, lewd pictures online, you are a sex worker. Although there are hierarchies within it, and because the world itself is very hierarchical, even in our industry there is a very prevalent, very obvious hierarchy that you can see, and you can even see it in the way how those people that fall on those hierarchies are treated. For example, online workers are seen as better because they're not really engaging in sex, they're just selling photos and content and blah blah blah. Meanwhile, full service sex workers are much more prosecuted, much more in danger, much more unsafe. But even in the category of full service sex workers, there's also a hierarchy. For example, there's this idea that sugar babies are better than escorts because at least sugar babies are committed to only one client. And that there's this idea that escorts are better because they're higher class, prettier, much more cleaner, aka safer, and that means that they're better than those who are hookers on the street or street walkers or basically walkers, right? There's still that whole hierarchy that is in full effect. But all of that is sex work. And I think that demystifying sex work would really do us so well, because then it would abolish the hierarchy that not only exists outside of sex work in like in the outside world, in the real world, but also in our industry, because it's actually very harmful, when someone tries to compare you to other workers and tell you like, oh no, you don't fit in my standard of what this particular worker makes and how I should treat them, so I should just treat you like shit because of how much I'm paying you. Which now I bring up how it's really funny, because it just mirrors in every industry. Like there is still a hierarchy in all industry. There's always like how we treat the janitor, how we treat the manager, how we treat the supervisor, how we treat the staff member, which basically again means that sex work is a real job, but like people just don't want to admit that.
So just, I guess, to support that and very quickly say what people might think the difference is, which I obviously don't agree with, right, is I think we have a certain conception, especially for women, that our identities are tied to our bodies. So look at these two figures, right? The figure of the domestic worker, the figure of the sex worker. Both of them are performing feminized labor, right? Both of them are performing some degree of sexual or care work. Both are precarious. Both are vulnerable to abuse, right? One of them goes out usually, stereotypically, at night, in public, taking up public space, and in a way is a little bit more transgressive. Why is it that one of them is a hero and one of them is an ideal form of work and one of them is stigmatized? Why is one of them seen as like experiencing more danger, right? And we need to like think about what our feminist agenda here is. Why have we made assumptions that for every woman her identity is equal to her body, and therefore she's selling her body and herself that is being lost in this transaction? Like, we all have very different relationships to our bodies. I'm just very confused about this generalization that's been made in relation to sex work.
Also to cut into that, as someone who is actually an domestic abuse survivor, the funny thing is that you are much more safer doing sex work, because then you don't have to sleep with the fucking abuser that's abusing you. You don't have to make food for your abuser. You don't really have to serve your abuser, and you don't have to tiptoe around your abuser for like 24/7. You know, with sex work, you're like, oh, I'm done with my business, I'm out. With marrying an abuser, you can't get out, especially here in the Philippines, because divorce is not illegal. I mean, it's not legal, right? Which means, like, why is no one saying, oh, let's abolish marriage, right? But everyone's saying abolish sex work, and it's just ridiculous. It's crazy, and I can't for the life of me understand. Well, I mean, I do understand. It's all about because women are taking their agency because like women are controlling the narrative when they're doing sex work. A lot of the times, they're setting the boundaries of what they're comfortable and not comfortable doing. Whereas when you're in a married, like when you're in a marriage, women are, supposed to submit to men, to cater to men. So there's that expectation that like she will just take whatever he gives her because she's a wife. And I think that's much more dangerous, and that should be what people are talking about, rather than like try to police sex workers and try to make us look like we're the bad guys in this situation.
Del, earlier you mentioned some misconceptions that people have regarding sex work. Sharms, when you started this type of work earlier, you mentioned you were coming at it from the point of view of a feminist. What are some of your preconceptions that were challenged, or what were your eyes opened to? What were some of the misconceptions you were exposed to when you began this work?
Oh, sorry, you're muted.
So, this assumption that women don't know what necessarily is in their interest, that when you are choosing to engage in sex work as opposed to your realistic alternatives, you are making, an irrational decision. There's no agency whatsoever there. And that once you are in sex work, so this is what, a lot of feminists use to exclude sex worker, right? This assumption that once you're in sex work, you're too damaged, you're too traumatized to be able to understand and adjudicate what is in your best interest. Therefore, you don't have a seat at the table in these conversations. And eventually, for me, this became like increasingly uncomfortable. I'm like, why are we not asking the sex workers what their needs are? And so this is a tool of excluding, right? The whole like you're too damaged. And I'm like,
it's very infantilizing. It's the same as when men see us as damsels in distress that need to be saved. So basically,
it's almost colonial.
These kinds of, yeah. Exactly. These kind of feminists, I do not call them feminists. I call them feminism appropriating reactionary trash. Farts. That's what they are. They're not feminists. I refuse to bastardize the feminist movement with their stupidity, because not only are they perpetuating and harming us, they are just doing the same thing that men do to marginalized genders, and that includes women a lot of the times. So
you heard it here first. They're farts. They're feminist appropriating reactionary. What was the last word? Trash. They're farts. Okay.
I'm sorry, sis, but you're trash.
Okay, so what is the current state of sex work in the Philippines? Because it's discussed so rarely, we rarely get any of the facts. All we see is what we perceive in media, right? And that representation is often very, very skewed. So is it common? What forms does it most often manifest? And what is the state of sex workers in the Philippines today?
It's super common, actually. It's very common, but there's really no one common way that it is happening or occurring in Filipino society. It's happening everywhere, online, offline, everywhere. Really, it's happening. So I can't really say, and I really don't think that there's like one common theme, because it happens everywhere. Really, it happens everywhere.
So we have a lot of
So yeah.
we have a lot of student sex workers. They're just not out, right? Or for some people, it's discontinuous also. You engage in sex work, you stop for a while, you do something else, you go back to it. For some people, it's part of a series of income generating activities. It's just one of the many strategies that you have. So yeah, Delilah is absolutely right. It's a lot more fluid and a lot more diverse. You have the online ones, you have people who are transacting on the streets, based in establishments, a combination of both, freelancers. Not everyone has a manager. It's a mix, and so the fact that it's such a mix should already make you wonder why we have a one size fits all policy for it.
All right, so it's a mix, right? There's so many people participating in so many different kinds of sex work in the Philippines today. Do our laws in the Philippines reflect that?
Okay, our law is confused. We look at sex workers simultaneously as criminals, victims, and workers. So our revised penal code treats the sale of sex as criminal. That hasn't been repealed. That's still there, right?
Okay.
Our Magna Carta of Women says that prostitution is male violence against women and women need to be protected from it. The anti-trafficking law can be interpreted to suggest that all prostitution is sexual exploitation, right? The sanitation code and the labor code, though, assume that sex work happens in bars and massage parlors and asks people to go through STD tests. Why would you ask that if it's not an implicit recognition that it happens, right? And then this confusion is translated on a local level too. So you have a hot mess of like no one knows what is being implemented, depends on the feel of the current like administration locally. And then you have the feminist movement largely, at least the Philippine Commission on Women, largely backing the Nordic model, which has not been passed yet, but it is a legislative priority for them, right? Which says we will criminalize the buying and the facilitating, but we will decriminalize the selling. So that's actually not decriminalized. So it's very disingenuous to call it decriminalized.
It's a lie.
Because, yeah,
It's a lie.
because
Why is it a lie?
so here's
It's
the
a lie
equivalent.
because it's
Like-
a lie because if you're fine with us selling it, but you are criminalizing our buyers, what you will create is that, a lot of our buyers will not tell us their information. They will not. We cannot hold them accountable, because then they can just be like, oh no, like, I don't need to do this because like, why would I? Like, they can just get away with abuse, and this has happened in almost all. I'm not even gonna say almost. Like, no, that's a lie. That's a lie. I lied. It's all of the countries that have implemented the Nordic model. Abuse has not stopped. Sex trafficking has not stopped. Even here in the Philippines, where that's kind of where the feminist, the fake feminist. Sorry, you're fake. Stop saying you're a feminist. You're not. The fake feminist movement is trying to lean into that Nordic model, even though, like, come on, like the Philippines is so late to implement the Nordic model. We've already seen the effects it has. It had, it's not even has now, because it had a lot of progressive countries have deviated from the Nordic model because they have seen the data, and not just the data, they have seen the very facts of sex workers decrying it, because it has not protected them. It has only led to them being more abused, being more marginalized, being more oppressed, being more stigmatized.
Yeah.
So,
and the
yeah.
way I see it is like this Nordic model has really made your work so much more precarious than it already is. Because, like, for example, you talked about like how like it's legal or decriminalized to sell it, but to buy it is not. That what you said about how it makes it harder for you to track down like who pays you. That just makes it so much harder for you like on like to track and people, and for people to kind of run away with the money. I think does that kind of happen because of the Nordic model too?
Yeah, that has happened before the Nordic model, but it has gotten worse after the Nordic model. And especially with like the pandemic, now that things are moving online, and a lot of sex workers, even though not all, because like not all of us can afford, the internet, and not all of us have the resources to create content to sell online. A lot of clients are exploiting the laws of like the Nordic model, because they can then demand for the content, and they can pay it and then ask for a refund. I will not say the name of the corporation that I really hate, but I still use it. But they are very very fucked up when it comes to like knowing that it's a payment. It's a payment. What would you call it? It's like it's a place where you can get paid, and it's a place where you can pay someone. Basically, it's a payment platform, and once they know that you're a sex worker, they will take your money because they have like a morality clause. There's actually even a very huge, very popular American bank that, again, I will not name, because what am I going to do if they're going to try to like hurt me? So I'm not going to say the name, but it's a very huge and very popular bank in the US, and they have a morality clause that if they find out that you are engaging in sex work, they will take your money and they will not refund you with it. So yeah, that's the reality. That's why a lot of sex workers are not. Yeah, a lot of sex workers are not comfortable with the cashless payment, because we know that cashless payment requires our identification, which is very dangerous. And aside from that, we know that like these payment platforms, these banks, these places that hold our money, could just take them away without like even warning us.
So what I'm getting,
all right. So you guys talked about like how what's happening up there, like in legislation. Like Charms talked about how they're confused, right? And how the Nordic model is hurting sex workers even more. But I want to know what's happening on the ground. Like, what's the grassroots movement like? Is there like collectives? Are there unions? Like, what's happening? Like, what's happening on the ground?
So
personally for me, I'm going to say first, because I feel like this is like a real moment for me. If you are a sex worker, you are not alone. And I'm gonna get emotional because I met Sharmila in the most uncertain time, because I have been thinking like, oh my God, like, is there really any noise about my struggle? Am I the only one that's talking about this? And I don't say that to be self-centered. It's just that when you try to go on socials and you try to look for sex work, like pro-sex work and pro-sex worker rights movement in the Philippines, there is none. All of it is victim blaming us. All of it is trying to excuse the shit that we go through because we willingly participate. And all of it is just doing us more harm. I actually had to meet someone else in order to meet with Sharmila, and then to get connected with a collective that I was following, but like they've since gone like a little bit inactive due to, again, the feedback they've gotten from the general public in the Philippines that is really unwilling and not ready to accept that sex workers are not damsels in distress that need to be saved. We are people who have been very loud, but have been very lonely because we have been isolated. We are not like, there's no real like there's no real established very popular community for us to organize and to become a real collective. It's very few, and if there are any, it's very underrepresented. It's very unheard of, even because it is so drowned down by the wrong information and all these messiah complex movements that want to try and save us instead of just listening to us. So yeah,
I was just gonna quickly add to that. So I agree. You do have the Philippine Sex Workers Collective, although they've gone a bit inactive. The thing is, if it's criminal, then they can't organize. They can't legally register. They can't even have an office address. They can't have a bank account. How will they get funding? Which funders are going to fund them? How are they going to get legal aid for police abuse, right? So all of these forms of stigma just make it, they can't unionize and advocate for themselves as workers. In fact, under the Nordic model, if you're a sex worker and you're working together, let's say you want to stay in the same house while someone is entertaining a client for safety reasons, you can get persecuted for facilitating the transaction, right? If you are a landlord of someone who's a sex worker, you can get persecuted for profiting off sex work earnings, right? So my point is, the laws are designed such that they really isolate sex workers and they remove any path to political agency. And then we are going to say that no one wants to be a sex worker, and we've purposely silenced them by making it so hard for them to organize in the first place, diba?
And I can imagine
That's
it
so
can be really
true.
difficult to find a community because, right, with the stigma around sex work, it's like, how do you know who in your life is a sex worker? How do these sex workers meet each other? I mean, thank God for the internet because it's a little bit more, community. You can like you see people with a lot of OnlyFans now, or uploading clips to Pornhub. So it's a little bit easier to find them, but there's no like central way to connect with everyone in a way that's safe. And I really don't blame anybody, like any worker, even outside of sex work, who doesn't want to unionize because of the fear. Even like for Amazon, right? Like like big companies that are considered real work. Even people there are scared to unionize because they're scared of having their jobs taken away. They're scared of judgment from other people, like people who are fighting against minimum wage laws. And you translate that pa into sex work, which has a whole onion layers of stigma. And I'm not surprised that the movement hasn't taken off. And as you mentioned, like there's no support from the public because of like we're a Catholic country, we're still very, very conservative on one end. And then you also have more progressive groups that are still not listening to sex workers as well.
Yes.
So I'm really not surprised.
It's like sobrang ipit ng mga like sex workers are so like caught in between like the crossfire
Yeah,
of like just of
I mean,
theology even. Yeah.
yeah, and that's so true because like at the same time na, diba, we are seen as like victims. We're also seen as perpetrators for tolerating sex trafficking, which is really fucked up because there are sex workers who have been victims of sex trafficking and they use sex work to get out of being trafficked. So it's very invalidating to tell us, "Oh my God, you're a perpetrator or you're a perpetrator for sex trafficking," when we know that the difference is so like blatant because we've lived it. We've lived it. We know how it is. We've experienced it. And for people to like gaslight us and tell us, "Oh no, but like this and that," even though none of them have ever even experienced what we've experienced, or some of them have experienced what we've experienced, but think that like they can monopolize the conversation, and like it is so much the human, like the diversity of humans is so diverse. How is it that we can't see sex workers as the same?
Before we go on to a segment that we like to do, I want to ask because we've been talking constantly about how, especially in the Philippines, but also in other countries, the idea of sex work and sex trafficking they're pretty much the same idea for most people, So what really is the difference between sex work and sex trafficking? Like, where does it cross the line?
Okay, so the same way that we can see the difference between an OFW and a human trafficking victim, same thing, same fucking thing. If you know that your dad is an OFW, your mom is an OFW, then wouldn't you get mad if someone told you your mom is actually a human trafficking victim? Because that's the same thing that we have to deal with every single day. So it's fucked up. So
I mean,
right.
Yeah. The
If
analogy
you know
I
the
make
difference between yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Right? Like it's very simple. If you know the difference.
yeah. So the analogy I make here is domestic violence happens in marriage. Quite common, actually. It's quite common. No one is trying to ban marriage, no? So why are we not going to just address the cases of actual abuse in the real sense of the word versus criminalizing or like making a generalization about an entire category of workers?
And not only that, not only that, if an OFW suffers from abuse from their employers, they have the Department of Labor and Employment to run to seek refuge to, but we don't have that. So where do we run to? We don't, right? Because if we run to cops, we get called the criminals, we get called the perpetrators. So what's really happening is that they are not protecting us. The laws against sex trafficking has not stopped sex trafficking. Sex trafficking is still at an all-time high here in the Philippines. There are children being trafficked into marriages that they shouldn't be in. There are women who are being trafficked into European countries to get married off of white men, to get green cards and to get a successful like mail to order brides situation. Those are trafficking. Sex work is not the same, and while it may overlap, it does not mean that when we create policies, we should see them as the same. It's very important though, for legislators. Honestly, I am not a law degree holder, but I am pretty sure that it's very important when it comes to legislations that we be specific of the distinction of things. So why is it that we try to murk and blur the lines between sex trafficking and sex work? You know, the law of like sex trafficking, anti-sex trafficking, in like anti-prostitution has not helped me in any way whatsoever. When I was doing sex work as a minor, I did not need punishment. What I needed was access to resources. And again, you know, when we try to make laws that criminalize people's behaviors for trying to survive, instead of addressing why do they need to do this to survive, instead of giving them a choice that they can do this or they can't do this, that's what would constitute liberation. That's what justice would look like. That's what freedom looks like. Because if it's not like that, it's controlling. If you're not going to address the root problems, if we're not going to listen to the people, what they really need help with, if we're going to try to act like we're the next Jesus, it's not going to be good for those people that we, you know, try to save. We're only harming them. We're killing them, basically. We're really killing them. Sex workers are struggling. We don't get stimulus checks ever since last year. It's been a fucking year since I lost my work. I have not gotten not one single centavo of my stimulus. I have not in any way or whatsoever form benefited from the taxes that I have paid, from all the fucking value-added taxes that I have paid for when I use condoms. So, see, that's the thing. When you try to illegitimize, basically invalidate a work that has actually contributed so much to the economy, what you are doing is profiting off of the labor of these people, and you are not giving them the credit that we deserve. A lot of sex workers are people who are kind of like Robin Hood. We literally are the ones who practice redistribution of wealth. We take the money from people and we share it to our communities because some of us are sisters, parents, grandparents, people that we take care of. And a lot of us take care of each other. Our mutual aid is so fucking strong. So that is how upset I am at how these people are, basically profiting off of our labor and trying to pretend that we are brainless, basically infants. We are being infantilized and we are being dehumanized because we don't have our agency to even control the narrative of our stories and ask and demand for what we want. Because some people think that they speak for us. I gotta admit, I don't even speak for all of us. I just speak for people like me who think like me. There are sex workers who have very different ideas of what liberation and freedom looks like. So that's something I respect them. So as long as their idea of freedom and liberation does not mean that other people have to give up their freedom and liberation.
Well, this seems like a good place to take a break on tonight's episode. We'd like to promote, if you like what you're hearing on the show tonight, you can support Now Open by supporting our coffee, and you can donate to Now Open on our coffee page for the price of a cup of coffee. I don't know what kind of cup of coffee. It's like a 7-Eleven coffee, all-day coffee, Starbucks coffee. Depends how bougie you want to be. You know, for the price of a cup of coffee, you can get extra perks from the gang at Now Open. And on that note, a huge thank you, the biggest thank you, Mandingo size thank you to our newest coffee subscriber, Trisha A. So there's now 2 Trishas subscribed to our coffee. Thank you so much. Trisha's just attracting other Trishas, really. I'm pretty sure she's cloning herself.
I have a Trisha army, and Trisha's get things done. You know?
There is a vat of Trisha homunculi
do.
somewhere in Mandaluyong. She's just growing. Anyway, so every week we read a letter, an anonymous letter from one of our customers who wants to share something or wants to seek advice. And this week, our letter comes from the same person that it always comes from, anonymous.
So our guests, please feel free to chime in because we love to hear our guests' input on our anonymous letters. So for today's anonymous letter, we have, again, anonymous. So anonymous person says, I've been single since high school. Lol, if you even consider relationships at that stage legit. At 27, I guess I'm kind of stuck between being the hopeless romantic girl who wants some love and being someone who prefers to steer away from any potential spark because I have too many issues. And it must feel crazy to open myself up to someone after years of I got my shit, don't need anyone. Feeling ko once I entertain love thoughts, I'll continually seek attention and be clingy AF to the point it would turn people off. It's frustrating. Is this a weird dilemma? I think it is. Help. I don't even know what my question is.
Yeah, I was like, what even was that, girl? Were you asking a question or were you just sharing? You can share your feeling.
I think it was like 80% share, 20%. Is this weird? Like, is there something that she has to change about herself?
I think it's a boundary issue. I think it's a boundary issue. I think that personally, with me, in my job, boundaries are so important. And not only my job, I'm in an open relationship, so boundaries are very important. I think girl needs. She's a girl, right? The person, the anonymous person, or the person asking. I'm assuming it's a girl. Correct me if I'm wrong.
No pronouns. By the way, if anyone sends a letter to us, please include your pronouns so we know how to refer to you.
Okay. For me, I think that the person just needs to know themselves more and to exercise boundaries, and think of themselves as like an onion. Onions have layers, which means that you can just slowly open up parts of yourself, not all of it, and then you can try to see what the other person responds. So you don't get too attached and then beg or crave for someone's attention. Just basically look at yourself as like an onion. There's layers. So I don't know, that's just the Scorpio in me. I don't open up. So I don't know. I have layers. So I think that would work, if you want to create boundaries where you don't want to get too attached and needy and too clingy. So
all right, Charms, how about you?
Good.
You can go after.
I have no relationship advice credibility, to be honest.
That's okay, neither do we.
To be honest, I feel like don't overthink this. You're okay, kid. Just do you. Life is short. The pandemic has made us realize how little time we actually have. So don't overthink this and just what feels good, as long as you're not hurting anyone.
Just go with the flow, but know where you're going to, go with the flow, but just kind of know where you're going, because you don't want to fall on the waterfall. Don't go chasing waterfalls.
Best song, by the way. All right, Kai, what do you think?
I agree with Charms. I think, don't overthink it. I think there's a lot of anxiety in the letter because, Anonymous is scared of what might happen. What if I become too clingy? What if, they might go away? I think there's a lot of anxiety in it because the way I see it is that you don't know. You don't know if you're gonna be too clingy. You don't know if you're going to drive someone away. As what Del said, also it'd be an onion, diba? There's so many layers to everyone. There's so many layers to everyone, as I said. Now, it's not you're a multifaceted person, and I think to just kind of zero in, everyone's a multifaceted person. So just to zero in on the fact that things might go wrong, I feel it's it's a very anxious thought, and it's normal. It's not weird at all. It's normal. But like you'll know until you put yourself out there. Like, it could go as good as you think it might go wrong. So
Sharmila,
it's
why does this girl sound like it's me? Like, this girl sounds
Did you
like it
write
was
in?
me. Remember when I said it? No, I did not. It just sounded like it was me because I was kind of asking the same thing to Sharmila like hours ago. And then I was like, you know what? Like, you can't really control. If someone runs for the hills, then fine, at least you had a good time. Or if you didn't have a good time, you kind of learned a lesson. Just take it as it is. But if it's like a really bad thing that you want to hold the other person accountable, then yeah, hold them accountable. But like, I think there's nothing wrong in wanting to experience and explore. So as long as, you're within the ethical bounds and knowing what you're comfortable and not comfortable with.
How about you,
So,
Jabin? What do you feel?
Yeah.
I think that this person might be putting a little too much pressure on themselves. Just because they let
Yeah.
a little time pass, getting to know themselves, which absolutely nothing wrong with that. And now they have there's a little pressure because it's been so long, right? And you know what? I promise you, I guarantee you 100%, nobody is putting more pressure on yourself than you. But on the other end of that spectrum, you know what? There's absolutely nothing wrong with you being single since high school also. There's nothing weird with that. If you feel like you're perfectly happy being alone, don't let the fact that all of your other friends are in relationships and you feel like you should be in a relationship at this point in your life stop you from enjoying what you're doing. If you're perfectly happy not being in a relationship, not weird at all.
Yeah. For me, like, I'm a hopeless romantic, so I understand you, and I'm also almost 27, so I get it. And as a hopeless romantic, I guess my advice would be make the mistakes, be clingy AF, because you won't know how, you have to sometimes overcorrect, undercorrect, and then you'll eventually find the space that you're comfortable in and that makes you happy. So if you're scared, that's cool. New things are scary. And so every new relationship, even if you've been in one like recently, is terrifying. So
you have the scientific method, your relationship, trial and error, experiment.
That is so true, though, because you won't know how to be. So basically just try if you want to. Again, no pressure.
So yeah, just know your boundaries. That's super important. Yeah.
And sometimes it takes a while to figure that out. Sometimes you have to like make mistakes and fuck shit up and burn everything down around you. Okay, maybe not that last part, but sometimes you gotta break a few eggs to make an omelet.
Thank you so much to Anonymous for sending your letter for this week's segment. If you want to send your anonymous letter to us, where can they send them, Trisha?
We have an anonymous form. I'm leaving the link in the comments right now. But if you don't want to be like entirely anonymous, if you're okay with us knowing your identity, then you can also message us on Facebook, Twitter, wherever else you can contact us. Private message on Discord. Of course, if you request anonymity, we won't mention who you are on the show. So, yeah.
When we last left our discussion, we were talking about how the legislation in the Philippines regarding sex work and how the people who are supposed to be in charge of helping the situation are kind of like Eskimos trying to put out a forest fire. So how do you guys feel about the opposite ends of the spectrum politically regarding sex work, meaning the far right and the far left? I don't understand these terms here. SWERF. And Marxist feminist, I'm going to need some info on those.
Aren't you the only straight guy here?
Yes, I'm the only straight.
Oh, okay. I love that you know nothing, Jon Snow, because I'm here to educate you.
I am an accurate representation of straight men in that I pretend to know many things.
So the reason why we wanted to ask this question is because every time there is a conversation about sex work, you have really two main voices that are popping out. You have your conservative religious people who are like, it's a sin, it's immoral, God hates you. And then on the other hand, you have people on the left who think that sex work promotes the objectification and degradation of women. They think that it just reinforces, especially male entitlement to women's bodies. And that once we solve capitalism, which also sucks, by the way, then there will be no need for sex work. So, how do you feel about these two polarizing opinions?
Okay, so first of all, and this is not against the show. I feel that this is largely due to what you guys have seen in the in the conversations happening online and offline. But the funny thing is that on the right, none of them will ever identify as a feminist. So you can't call them SWERFs because SWERF is an acronym for sex work or sex worker exclusionary radical feminists. And right-wing conservatives are nowhere near radical and nowhere near feminist. So
very fair.
That I'm correcting. I'm correcting y'all. Not it's not your bad. Pretty sure this is the fault of like online reactionaries. But yeah. So on the right, they're not feminists. Marxist feminists are actually the same thing as SWERFs because they don't want to include sex work or sex workers in their radical feminism. And I really refuse to bastardize the feminist movement by calling them feminists because they're not feminists. If you are feminist, you are for all women, and that includes women who work in marginalized labor, which means, if it's not justice and all for everyone, it's not true liberation. In the words of Emma Goldman, if I can't dance to it, it ain't my revolution. So there. But okay, so to address that, on the right, they're just the typical conservative people that think sex is immoral. Well, the funny thing is that sex is immoral, but then it's also sacred, which is very ironic. I grew up in a very conservative household, so I understand their lack of understanding of sex, and so yeah, I mean, like conservatives, they're conservatives. I feel like it's not something that I want to waste so much time on because, no, you don't deserve my energy. I will direct my energy though on the left, on the so-called left, the Marxist feminist approach, who approach sex workers and sex work really as this kind of degrading form of labor, and that they want to their ideology is really based on abolishing all work, right? But the funny thing is that when we do abolish work, we're not abolishing labor, we are still valuing labor. If you're a true leftist, you would understand that every single human being wants their labor to be valued. So when a Marxist ironically says that sex work is not work and that it should be abolished and that it should be not recognized as a valid form of labor, they are touting the very same capitalistic things that their enemies are promoting. And to me, Marx really falls flat on his understanding of sex work. One, because he's not a sex worker, and two, he is a white man. Let's not forget that he is a white man. A lot of his content and understanding around sex, well, not sex work, basically his whole ideology, that a lot of leftists think of him as the new Jesus or something and worship him and treat his book as the new Bible. A lot of them have forgotten that the concepts that he has, in terms of community building and all of that, it's a lot of those things are stolen from pre-colonial indigenous people. The concept of community building, the concept of mutual aid, the concept of uniting with the proletariat, that is a very pre-colonial indigenous practice that people did, and he only conceived that idea because he was realizing, oh, hey, look, in this colonized world, there's another problem that we have that are facing, because look, we're supposed to be a great place, right? Because we've colonized all the other things. Why is there still poor white people in our communities? And and that. Like he's basically like stealing a lot of the ideas from like Black, Indigenous, and people of color around the world. So I feel like if you are a true feminist, why would you ever prop a guy like that to be your self-identifier for your belief and your values? And this may rile a lot of people up, but I really don't think that it's necessary to read Marx's theory on communism and leftism just to be radicalized. I think that if you just look harder around you, if you just empathize more, you listen more to people around you when they're speaking from their lived experiences, that is what radicalizes you. And not only that, if you are an individual who is oppressed, multiply marginalized and oppressed in this society, you will have no other option but to be radicalized. So I think, while it's great that people should read, and I do advocate for that, I don't like the whole elitism of like the left and when it comes to like reading theory. I feel that it doesn't matter how good your theory is. What does it look like in praxis? Is it good praxis? So for me, the Marxist feminists, again, fake feminists, they fall flat on how they invalidate sex work, which is a very valid form of labor, because let's assume that we don't live in a capitalist world, let's assume that we are in a communist world or in a socialist world. People would still do labor for trades, which means sex work.
Yeah, and Marx.
Yeah.
Yeah, Marx says, like, for example, Marx said, the proletariat has nothing to sell but their labor power, right? And I don't understand why, like, everyone else's labor is valid as labor power, but sex work is not valid as labor power. So it's like
because sex work is gendered labor. It is
exactly, and Marx
misconception.
falls flat in his gendered lens.
It's
Even Marx's
kind of
feminism
like
falls flat. Yeah.
it's kind of like what's this straight guy, the token straight guy here's name? It's kind of like if we listen to him talk about our fucking lives. And we're like, oh yeah, we believe this guy. This is our political identity. This is our belief now. This is what we want. This is what we want to practice. It's literally that. Like how does it make sense? If we want to live or change the world into a feminist world, we have to understand the intersectionality, the intricacy of our oppression, and to not look at it in a very class reductionist way and to think, oh no, we're all poor. We're oppressed the same, because we're not.
I have a question for you all, actually, which I've been like trying to understand about Marxism, right? So if they refuse to recognize sex as labor, is the argument that therefore it should just be given for free and people are just entitled to this for free? Because I'm not sure this is working to prove their argument, right?
If there's anything Marxists are famous for, it's their policy on free love, right?
Yes, known polyamorous Marx. Just
But
kidding.
like, here's the thing. That's the thing with love and sex. Love and sex are not the same.
I think like from what I understand, because I am very, very clear about my stance on sex work, but I have a lot of friends who we've had several conversations about this, and for them it's more like it's really the exchange of money that changes everything, because as we've said, there's no ethical choices under no ethical consumption under capitalism, and it's really that idea of like, I think they think like if you don't have to pay your bills, let's say we all have universal basic income and houses and all of our needs taken care of, then no one's going to want to do sex work. And then I guess on the other side, they also feel like the commodification of sex.
I'm gonna piggyback off of what you said about like, yeah, if your bills are paid, okay, but like, what about luxury? Luxury is for the people. Like, do you really think that we're just gonna live in a communist world and be like, oh yeah, we have food, we have electricity, we're good now? No, we're gonna have our wants. Our needs are different from what our wants. And if I want something and you got it, and I tell you, hey, I'm gonna do something for you so I can get what you want, I feel like that's a fair trade. And on the topic of commodifying sex, it's funny because sex is just a physical activity, and it's a very neutral thing, you know. It really just depends on the people involved who are doing it and what they make it out to be. Like I could just do it just to get off, or I could do it because I want to communicate my feeling of like adoration for someone. So what they're really doing is again touting the same patriarchal conservative thing, and you really begin to see how fragile their arguments are, because you can always relate it back to the same thing that right wingers, conservatives would say, which begs you
Definitely.
to question: Are you really leftist, or are you just using the ideology to tout some puritanical bullshit?
Right. And like what Charm said earlier, parang, why is it that sex should be given out for free under the Marxist
Yeah.
argument? When, diba, like Marx said that labor is your labor power. Okay, that's all they have to sell. But like, if I am cutting down trees, and if I'm I don't know, like doing some other form of labor, and it's fine for me to get paid for that. But if I do sexual labor, it becomes like wrong to charge for that. And that's honestly, you're right. That's such a paradox in their
Yeah,
argument.
you know, I mean, at the end of the day, and I will say this, I have a lot of hate in my heart for a lot of the established and like the people that dominate the leftist movement. I will say this, you know, a lot of these people are not who they seem to be. A lot of these people are people who are privileged in this current society that we have. And so it makes you wonder, why would they want a world? Why would they want to change a world that benefits them so well? You know, like, why would you want to change it? Like, you know, like it's a very conflict of interest. Why would you? And then you begin to look at the history of a lot of like leftist movements, and you see how a lot of their leaderships are men, are straight people, are privileged people, and you begin to wonder, wait, hold on, is this just people who are trying to co-opt a movement that is for the liberation and justice of all people, so that they can come off at the top of it, because they think that like the current world that they live in, where their privilege has not given them the same power that their oppressors have given them. It's very what's this? It's very telling whenever you hear a what's this a person that identifies themselves as a leftist, and then you look at how their values and their core beliefs are, and you could really point out who are the ones who just want to be the new fascists, and the ones who are really wanting to change the world in a very radical way that is away from what we have been so used to.
How about you, Sharmila? Because when you did a talk on sex work a couple of years ago, Twitter was ablaze. You know, actually, that's where I first heard of you. Was from that Twitter conversation. So those were really the same. It's really the same question we have. So how did you feel about the reaction?
I mean, I think we have fictions that we tell ourselves, right? We tell ourselves that marriage and non like and marriage is pure. It's completely love, and there's no transactional dimension to it. But there is a transactional dimension to many social relationships. Why are we singling out sex work for being transactional? So that's one question I have. I don't think anyone's really like answered that, right? The next is, even if someone calls themselves a social movement or an activist movement, they're not, as Del says, they're not immune to misogyny. Sexism permeates, right? Who are the leaders of this movement? Who do they speak for? What you consider work is important. And I don't know that our leftist movement, because under this logic, would they classify housework as work? Would they classify like predominant feminized forms of work as work? Like, that's a conversation we need to have. When I was with the collective and we were attending a forum, right? And there was a union leader who was bashing sex work, right? He was like, hindi, kailangan natin itigil, lalala. And so one of the leaders of the collective, his name is Tex, raises his hand and is like, how would you define work? At saka hindi makasagot si union leader. Hindi niya ma-explain anong definition niya of work. Kasi na-expose how gendered it was, right? So maybe where I differ from Del is I am slightly more hopeful, but maybe it's my job to be hopeful. I completely get your anger, and I'm angry too. But I'm hoping that within Marxist feminism, there is space for people to push for a more creative reinterpretation of labor.
Yes.
It's time for a
Yes.
course correction. It's time for a reckoning. So if I can't
Also, when you said that like people are so weirded out about transactional social relationships. Yeah, but what's so wrong with that? Don't we all deserve a relationship that we know contributes to our life in ways that we want a friend to contribute in? Like it is so sad, and I feel like and again, this is because a lot of the movement is led by men. Sad to say, I'm sorry, token straight guy, not white, but straight guy. I'm sorry to say this, but your kin needs to back the fuck off, because like what they're doing every time they try to infiltrate and lead a movement is they project all their toxic masculinity bullshit, and then it becomes it becomes their theory, and then it becomes their praxis, and that's why they're all so sad. Like, oh my god, why is this relationship transactional? You want to know why? Because men don't want to contribute anything. Because men don't contribute to anything. They just think, oh, their presence. Wow, man, I'm so glad that a man has graced my has graced me with his presence. And you can always see that, because when me personally, with my relationships with women, we women have standards with our friends, because we don't want to just be like, having a good time like nothing. We want like deep friendships. But with men, it's so shallow, it's so superficial. And so you see that translate when men lead movements, when the movement is led by male adjacent or misogynistic people, or people that are so entrenched in the patriarchy they don't even know that they're so deep in it, that they project it onto their theories and they practice it on their praxis. So yeah, it's as someone who has dated men from all spectrums, it's, for me, the very worst kind of men are leftist men, because they pretend that they are so different, that they are so much better, but then they're not. They are the most, like, they're the hugest, I don't even know if that's a word, they're the largest disappointment that I have ever met, because I would think, oh yeah, you know what, this guy's so woke, like he's probably, but then at the end of the day, he's still a guy. And just because he says he's a leftist, he thinks like, oh, I should be free from accountability, I should be this and that. And I can see that happening in so many organizations and collectives that identify themselves as leftists. A lot of the times they are led by not just men really, but people who are, like I said, in this current world that we live in that is so hierarchical, they are much more privileged than they are oppressed. And it's a very conflict of interest when they try, because basically then they're just allies, right? How is it that an ally can lead a revolution? The revolution must center those that are oppressed. Allies should just be supporting, So to me, it's a very questionable thing whenever I see how the representation of leftist people or leftist politics is heading towards, because I do not think that it's really trying to liberate all people. I think a lot of the times it's mostly just trying to pretend it's the next Jesus, and in order to control people, in order to lie to people, to believe them that these people or these school of thought really cares about them when they don't. And it's sad, because when I say that, then I am accused, oh, maybe you work for the CIA. And I'm like, bitch, if I work for the CIA, I would not be a hoe. But like, you really thought, but anyway, like they think that like I'm just parroting capitalist propaganda, when I think that multiple things can be true at once. I can hate capitalism and still be cautious of who is dominating the conversation for moving us farther left away from capitalism, because it's important. If we're going to start something new, then we better start off on a clean slate. We better start something new that is better, not worse, and not the same.
All right. So moving on from that, what are some of the things that the sex worker community needs to survive, thrive, and succeed? What are some of the things that can be put into place to protect sex workers? What are some of the changes that you'd like to see?
I think personally, what I would like to see is the way that journalists try to investigate our stories for clickbait. I wish that they realize that there are sex workers who are writers. Hello, one of them is me, and you guys should hire me. And there are people who are sex workers who do the jobs that you do, and instead of seeing them only as sex workers, understand that you are not the only ones who work two jobs. We do too, you know. And when you pass the mic to us, it allows us to tell our stories, as complex, as diverse, and maybe not so united as it may be. It's empowering. It gives us agency. It allows us to have, the basic necessity of our own human rights to be able to tell our stories on our own terms, on our own narratives, without it being used as cannon fodder for people who want to prop themselves up for government posts, for people who want to sensationalize our stories to invoke emotion. And yeah, I think it should start with that. And when that does happen, I want people to listen to us when we are speaking. And again, as complex and as divisive even the sex work community is, I feel that it's important that people still listen to us and learn, because when we have conflicts in our communities, we discuss it and we share why we feel these things that we wanted to say and why we shared them to people. But the onus of changing the way we are treated is not on us. When people say that, oh, but abusers abuse sex workers, it's really fucked up, because if the world did change, we would have better clients. And just to be very clear, I like my job, but there are days that I hate it because of how the world is and how the world sees me. And a lot of our clients are people, it's not like our clients are from Mars, diba? Our clients are from Earth, so they are socialized to treat us the way the world has taught them to treat us. So if the world did change, then our clients would change, and we would be safer, and we wouldn't have to even have, we wouldn't even have to fight for our rights if the world just decided to hold themselves accountable in the many ways that they have either perpetuated or internalized whorephobia. The fear of being associated with whores, the fear of being called a whore, the fear of the word whore itself. I think there's nothing wrong with that word, and I feel that it's a word that I can reclaim. Some people don't want that word, and that's fine, but I feel that if we demystify that word, our perception of the word, and the people who are that word, we can truly, really begin to change.
Awesome. How about you, Sharmila?
So I agree with that. The other thing I'm going to say is we need to remove the police from the equation. A lot of our interventions when it comes to sex work, front and center the police, right? They are the primary rescuers. But hello, they're the ones abusing the legal ambiguity, where you have anti-trafficking rates that are being used as a cover for extortion and abuse of sex workers. Under the war on drugs, grabe ang they've weaponized this, no? And my sex worker friends and the ones I've spoken to in my research were like, lalapitan sila ng police, sasabihin, I'll just plant drugs on you, who will care, diba? Which has made it even worse. So I am not sure why. All the sex workers I've interviewed, tinanong ko, who are your biggest source of threats? The feminists will argue that it is the clients and the bugaws, right? That's not always false. But their constant answer is the police. So bakit? yung biggest threat nila, bakit yan yung iniisip natin na rescuers? Hindi ko talaga maintindihan. And I think feminists really need to think hard about our relationship with the police. They're not our friends. Why are we centering interventions that give them such an important role? So take the cops out, reduce their power over sex workers, and increase sex workers' power over their working conditions. And you can do that. And you can still, push for structural change, right? You can still push for alternatives. You can still push for subsidies, for welfare, alongside treating them as workers. That's the formula.
That's true. And at the same time, it doesn't take away from the fact that we can still work on anti-trafficking.
Mm-mm.
You know, just because just because someone is anti-trafficking, when they say they're anti-trafficking, you have to really look deep into what they actually consider as trafficking. That's when you really know. I mean, I haven't even touched on how racialized anti-trafficking movements are, how very classist it is, and how often the targets are not really the people that should be targeted.
Right.
So, yeah, like we can still be fighting for sex workers and sex worker rights while still be fighting against trafficking, And
So you said something about like how we could be fighting for sex workers' rights. So how can we, like as non-sex workers, support the sex worker community in fighting for necessary change?
I think personally for me, there are a lot of like very there are a lot of out and very political sex workers on Twitter. You just have to find the right one, and that's the key. You have to find the right one, which means you have the responsibility to also do the research yourself, to hold yourself accountable. I really do not advocate for like people, trying to call out other people just yet. I feel like it's so much more important to start with yourself. Start local. Start with your family. Have the hard conversations with yourself, with your family, with your friends. If you can't even do that, why do you think that you have the audacity to have these conversations with strangers? You have to start small, and it's really important that we hold ourselves accountable, because majority of us have been raised in a very horror-phobic society. A lot of us are raised in a very conservative society, particularly here in the Philippines. So it's important that we identify in what ways we have internalized these ideologies and how we have perpetuated them, whether or not we intended them or didn't intend to do so, because the impact of our actions will always stay on the lives of those people who are suffering, who are marginalized, and who are oppressed. So it's important that we have to do the work on ourselves first, and that means that we have to be proactive. We have to get involved. We can't just say, "Oh, I am an ally to the sex worker cause." We have to be proactive. We have to get involved. I mean, I'm getting myself involved as well because, diba, again, like I said, I have privilege over other sex workers. So even if, like, even myself, I'm getting involved. Like this is what I'm doing here. I'm doing my part. So what I expect civilians, I call non-sex workers civilians. What I expect civilians who want to be allies to do is to be proactive, to do more reading, to do more listening, and to just really be more empathetic. Because like when you do that, everything else will just flow so naturally. You will just quickly go to the right sources, to the right platforms, to the right audiences. As long as you have to start with yourself. It's very important, because I hate to admit it, I used to be the person that I hate now, because I was raised Christian. So if I was raised Christian and I got to this point where I am here, there is no excuse for anyone to not get to this point of self-awareness, social awareness, political awareness, socioeconomic awareness.
How about you, Sharms?
I mean, so I agree. there's a lot of work on yourself, right? I do think if you have privilege, using it might be helpful. So recently, whenever I see stories on sex work that depict it really problematically, or kind of just assume a lack of agency, they assume, they use terms like women in prostitution or prostituted women. These are coded words. Immediately, there are assumptions here about a lack of agency, right? I write the editor. I'm like, this is not okay. Problem. Sometimes they're quick to react because it's sometimes coming from a position of malice, sometimes coming from a position of ignorance. I kind of prefer to assume ignorance, right? So try to intervene where I can in my own spaces. But I guess have some intellectual humility as well. And we're not going to have the correct answers all the time. As allies, we're gonna slip up. I've slipped up here and there. To work on that and to keep talking to sex workers where possible. I guess the other thing I'm going to say, by the way, is, the Philippine Sex Workers Collective is inundated with requests from students to do research with them and interview them. I mean, which is great. But at the same time, I'm like, this is labor too. This is a lot of emotional and intellectual labor that we are asking of them, right? So if possible, sex workers, either should be compensated for their time or people should be willing to meet them halfway in doing the work as well. Because they're doing activist labor out of pocket. There's no funding for that, right?
Yeah,
And
I agree with that, honestly. Like, if you know anyone, if you see someone, I don't even care. I don't care if people think, oh no, but what if I get scammed? What if it's a lie? I don't care. Give your money. Open your fucking wallet. The same way you want white people to give you reparations, it's the same thing. It's the same thing because any sex worker, especially when they are Black, Indigenous, a person of color, they will always suffer more than people who are not sex workers. So for me, like, I agree with what Sham is doing, but even then, like, you don't need to get our labor to support us financially. I'm not saying this to coerce people or to blackmail or whatever. I'm saying if you know anyone who is a sex worker and you know that they're trying to make ends meet, because all of us are trying to make ends meet. There is no rich sex worker. That's a 1 in a billion. That's a 1 in a billion story. And a lot of the times, those rich sex workers are usually white sex workers. And the chances of brown sex workers earning the same as a white sex worker, again, 1 in a billion. It's very rare. The problems that exist in our in our world does not suddenly go away in the sex sex work industry. So yeah, like, open your wallet, pay us for a time. Just,
thank you.
Buy our groceries, basically. I don't care. Just give us money. You don't need to be like, oh, I want to buy your content. No, fuck that. No, don't. Just give us money out of pocket. I don't care. That's it. Because a lot of us would rather have that than, have to try to convince someone and be like, oh, hi, buy my content, whatever. Because that's labor. That's so much more taxing. So if you want to support us, then it has to be super proactive to the point where you are not only saying the words, you are acting the act.
Well, thank you so much to the both of you, because honestly, this conversation has been long overdue. Again, like as Jibim said earlier, this is something
And
we
very
want to talk
much
about.
needed. Very much needed.
Very much needed, because as you said, there's really no pushback against these really harmful policies from any movement, really, left, right, center, and anywhere. So I'm really hoping that everyone who's listening, that you take Sharmila and Del's words to heart. Please support your local sex workers. Give them money. Subscribe to their OnlyFans. Donate to their Gcash. Whatever. Usually, sex workers have modes of payment on there. If you want to change the world, that's the first mini step that you can take, because all the other changes require much bigger action and much more collective action. So if you want to start small and do something you can do right now, it's donating to the people who really, really need it. So, Kai, I want to know, we're both students in this, so
Yes.
What was your main takeaway from tonight?
Oh my goodness. For me, it was really demystifying sex work, because I've been so curious about sex work for so long. I never really knew where can I get, like, where can I learn? And then I learned so much, especially about like how, like, in terms of legislation, how it's just so harmful, how harmful to sex workers. The same way in terms of on the plane of ideology, it becomes really harmful to sex workers. Na parang it's very precarious for them to be working, but at the same time, like they find the fact that they find empowerment, the fact that they find, like, you know, they keep fighting for it. Is what I feel is very parang inspire yo. Ayun. So that's what I got from the conversation tonight. What about you, Trisha?
I think my main takeaway is that capitalism sucks and hurts us all, and we're all trying to really liberate all workers. We're trying to give more worker protections across the board, across industries. But there's obviously a sector that is so behind, and it's typically women. It's always women, and it's always feminized labor that's behind, and that is definitely something we need to interrogate. And I love what Sharmila said about intellectual humility, because a lot of us love to think that if we know theory, if we've read the books and done the papers and I watch the videos and all that we know what's better for other people. But that's never true. You never know what's better for another person. You should always ask the people that you want to help what they want to do. So intellectual humility, in the sense that you have to know that you are not the end all be all of all solutions, and it really helps to listen.
That's also a takeaway of mine, where it's like, I mean, being academic, like trying to figure out parang how, like what Del said earlier, na you don't have to read the books to be radical, you know? I think that's one of my biggest takeaways also. Now, outside the four walls of a classroom, there's so much to learn, and there's still so much to grow with and to grow from. When you really listen to people like on the ground, you know? So yeah, that's my other takeaway.
All right, so we're nearing the end of the episode. Thank you again to our guests. Is there anything that you want to promote, like your social media or any upcoming anything?
I don't know. I feel like it's soliciting if I promote my work. Hello, but anyway, no. I want to leave with a very important statement that I did not forget to say this. I just want to say it last so that it sticks to people's mind. I do not need to feel empowered doing my job. Whether or not I fucking hate my job or I love my job, I deserve to have workers' rights and protection. And I deserve, and I'm entitled to that as a human being who is working and really doing something for the economy. I'm not even ashamed to say that. I deserve that my job should be validated, should be recognized, and that I should be protected as a worker. I don't need to feel empowered doing it. I can hate my job and still deserve the protection and the rights that any worker is entitled to. So that's just my last words. I'm sorry I can't promote myself. I would love to, but for legal reasons, I can't. But I don't know.
I mean, who doesn't hate their job on occasion?
Yes.
We all hate our jobs sometimes. How about you, Sharmila? Do you want to promote anything?
So nothing really. I mean, I'm on Twitter, I'm on Facebook. If you wanna read up about this, I usually share things. I also retweet sex workers. So that might
like read Sharmila because she's much more calmer. I'm much more angry.
yeah. So
if you are fragile and you can't handle me being angry, I'm sorry. Sharmila is for you. That's why we work. We're like the yin and the yang.
Awesome. I think we left a link to Sharmila's Twitter in the description. I can add it in the comments. She's been an amazing follow. Honestly, I followed her like a couple of years ago. No regrets. It's been really illuminating. So make sure you do that. All right. Kai, do you want to promote your socials?
Yeah. Okay. That's XOXCAI on Twitter and Instagram.
All right. Trisha? Since our working straight boy had to leave, so I guess I will have to promote his stuff.
He is at his disappointment.
Yeah, well, he's got to earn money for his little churro. So if you want to follow Jobim, he's at Jobimism on Twitter, at Jobim Javier on Instagram. He also hosts a weekday morning show called The Morning Show on Jam 88.3. I don't know what time it is. 6 to 9, I'm going to guess. That's a guess. But if you want to follow me, it's mostly cat pictures and angry hot takes. That's at Trisha O'Bannon. But you don't have to follow me. I'm not a very interesting follow. You can instead follow Now Open.
She is.
Am I? I'm
You
just
are.
downplaying myself. So you can follow Now Open on Facebook, Now Open PH, same on Twitter. And as we mentioned earlier, we have a coffee where you can donate. And honestly, I'm gonna put my money where my mouth is, and I'm gonna donate some of that to local sex workers as well. So make sure you donate if you don't want to do it yourself, but please do, because there's PayPal fees, so it's less if you do it that way. But if you decide to
just give us cash, throw us money when we're walking in the streets. I'm kidding, don't. But like that's fine.
Coins,
if you do that
would
I
hurt.
would be glad to catch it all.
So if you like what we do here, we have our coffee. And if you want to catch us off the air on the regular days, we have a Discord channel where you can ask us questions. You can talk to other people in the community. And just basically hang out with us. Sometimes we stream games. Sometimes we have hangouts. It's a very fun community to be a part of. Very safe, very non-judgmental, and inclusive for everybody. So I'll leave the link to the Discord in the comments.
Hold on. Here's the thing. See, I even actually forgot it, but this is actually one thing that I forgot. When we say sex workers, it's not just women, because like a lot of us are not women. Okay, so like I need people to understand that like it's very gender labor because misogyny and patriarchy. But there's male sex workers, there's men sex workers, there's basically anyone across the gender identity spectrum. There's a sex worker.
Absolutely.
Least. Yeah. So
that's a really great note, actually. A lot of people think that it's just women being quote unquote exploited, but in fact, it really traverses all sexual identities and other, intersectional categories. Like a lot of disabled people turn to sex work because they cannot do labor. So thank you so much to everybody who joined us tonight. If you like what we do, you can check out our past episodes on Spotify. Before we officially close the show, I just want to say a final shout out to all the people who joined us tonight. That's Ruth, Alice, Trisha A, love you girl, Mitzi, Nikki, Nick, Mackie, Maria, Chi, Essa, and okay, that's it. All right. So thank you to everybody. So this is the part where before we close, we want to give our weekly sex assignment. So to our hosts, our sex assignment segment is where we just really want to encourage people to explore new things and, push some boundaries and try to figure out what, sex things that they like. So last week, our sex assignment was come up with a threesome list. So Kai, who was on your list?
My girlfriend and myself. So I want to clone myself and then kind of have a threesome with
oh my god!
me
Every time I say that,
and
people think
my
I'm crazy.
girlfriend.
Look, we all want to fuck ourselves.
Exactly. And my question now is that masturbation or is that actually sex? Like, is that like
I feel like that's a
sex with a
question that
person?
could be, what's this? I feel like that's a question that will only be answered if it happens.
I know, right? Like, shit, I wish.
How does it feel like? Will you
on
feel,
our episode on
will
masturbation,
you feel yourself feeling yourself? Or is it like a very completely different experience? Or will you like have like synced minds and feel each other feeling each other? See?
Right?
I don't know.
Right. Exactly. Thank you for getting me. Like,
so many possibilities.
So many possibilities.
I like how that's
Trisha,
your
who's
threesome list. Oh, mine is terrible. Obvious choice, Kristen Stewart, and Pennywise from It. I have a weird thing for Pennywise from It. I don't know. I think it's like his big buggy eyes.
Oh, the eyes. But
it's like the big eyes, and I don't know. He just seems like really fun and scary. So for
the
this,
actor or like the character?
Oh, absolutely, Bill Skarsgård. Absolutely, Bill Skarsgård. And I think that's it. It kind of led to Pennywise because of Bill Skarsgård. I also like Tim Curry from the original, so it works both ways. All right. So for this week's sex assignment, we got. Oh, if I do this, it's going to be backwards. So do some sex games. So it's a very broad interpretation. You know, like if you have Ilya's Kama Sutra cards, that can help.
Something like this stupid dice thing. That's like.
Oh, I also have that. Yeah. Like use some
Oh
sex
my God.
dice. Do some strip poker. Basically make
What was
sex a
that
little
game?
gamify it.
There was this card game that I saw like on Instagram that it's like about there's a horny geist, and basically it's like
Yes.
you have to figure out like the every move. You can't do it unless the horny geist tells you to do it, and if you do it before the horny geist tells you to do it, you lose the game. And it's so cute. It's so cute. I have it upstairs, so I'm gonna try it with my girlfriend when I see her. I'm so excited. I'm gonna
Awesome.
try that.
All right. So that is this week's sex assignment. So we have, of course, upcoming episodes. So our next episode will be for the 33rd episode of Now Open. We're going to be talking about talking to kids about sex. How do you do that? You know, like we keep talking about how sex education sucks here, and a lot of them are trying to pass it off to the parents, and parents are very not equipped to handle these conversations. So this will hopefully help all those parents out there figure out how to talk to their kids about sex with, you know, age appropriate levels.
Right.
But we will be taking a quick break next week. We've been doing 33-ish straight weeks, and I need a break, y'all. So we're going to be
Mama Trisha needs to chill.
I need to
Oh my
chill
God!
out.
Speaking of break, I gotta go. I don't know if
yes,
Sharmila
all right.
already went, but I gotta
Yes,
go.
all right.
Also,
Thank you so much,
I'll tune
Del.
in for your next episode, though.
Yes,
So,
thank you so
yeah.
much. So
Thank you for having me.
Of course,
You've been incredible.
Thank you for being here.
Okay, thank you.
Bye. Everyone say goodbye to Del.
Bye, Del.
Bye.
All right, so we will be resuming Now Open with the same content that you love on April 13th. So take a break, everyone. Chill out. Have a self-care day next Tuesday evening, and we'll be back on April 13th. See y'all when we next open.
Bye, customers.